what's up VC? It's Steve again, Harmless Rebel, and it's time for another hard rock and heavy metal update. I think this one is pretty much all metal, but we'll see as we go through it. First up, what's playing in the background right now, this is Holy Terror, Terror and Submission. This is the band's debut. I'm not sure where Holy Terror are from. I want to say they're a California band, but I'm not 100% sure. But just killer thrash from the late 80s. This is 88. This is the US pressing, which didn't come out until later for some reason. Their original press, originally they were only released in England. But like I said, just really killer thrash. I'm actually surprised, and it may just be the timing. This album didn't hit in the US until the late 80s, end of 88, early 89, which I think they just caught the end of the thrash wave, which is why they never got bigger. They had one other album after this, which I've never seen or heard. But this is a really killer thrash, and I do recommend picking that one up. Next up, probably one of the most important bands for me in my musical evolution, next to Metallica and Megadeth. This was the band I listened to the most in the early 90s. Didn't really get into them until about 91, so I was a couple years behind on these guys. But once a friend of mine gave me their debut on cassette, I couldn't get enough of them. And I love everything that they've ever released, but especially their first three albums. And it's funny, the debut album I borrowed from my buddy, what was his name? Jose. I borrowed from a buddy of mine, Jose, and I think I kept it for like a year. He kept asking for it back, and I was like, yeah, I'll bring it. And I purposely wasn't bringing it back because it's the main cassette that I was listening to at that point. And I don't remember if he ended up just giving it to me or what the deal was, but I ended up keeping the cassette. But this is Blessing in Disguise from Metal Church. A lot of people call them US power metal. I kind of get that. I never considered them that. To me, they were always just straight up US metal. But again, I love just about everything they put out, and they're still putting out killer albums to this day. So really happy to have that one on vinyl. Next up, one of the best debut EPs ever, in my opinion. I don't see a lot of people show this EP. I hear people talk about especially their second and third album, on occasion their first album. But I think this EP gets overlooked a lot, and it really shouldn't, because it's amazing from beginning to end. Halloween. Such a great LP. And this one is maybe a Dutch pressing. It may be a German pressing. Yeah, an original German pressing on Noise. Here's on the Noise label, and then you've got the custom Exploding Pumpkin there. I love most of what Halloween has put out. I was just talking to Scott about a week ago, actually. Their newest CD is really good, and I highly recommend, or their newest album is really good. And it's kind of a return to form, in my opinion. But the best Halloween for me will always be the Kai Hansen stuff. Kai Hansen is an absolute genius, and I just don't think they were ever as good once he left. But, man, if you guys haven't heard this, amazing EP. Seek this one out. Next up, man, just another killer thrash album. I'm glad this one was repressed, because this is one of those... originals go, I want to say, in the couple $100 range. All they ever had was one album and one EP, and they're both on this set. But this is Caustic, and I want to say Caustic was German too. I may be wrong though. But this is Malicious, and it's also got the Caustic EP on here as well. And this was just recently released by, is it The Crypt? Yeah, The Crypt, back in 2016. Get this while you still can, because it's a real limited pressing. You can still find it for under 30 bucks. It's on this, it's kind of hard to see, but, oh, there you go. On this purple and pink. It's kind of hard to see it, but it's a really cool vinyl. But there is the Malicious album cover right there. And on the inside, that was the EP album cover right there. And just really killer thrash. Let's see. Swiss. There you go. So, a Swiss thrash band. But again, highly recommend getting this one while you can. Original pressings go in the hundreds of dollars. So when I ran across this, where did I find this? Maybe Half Price Books. I got a whole stack of really stuff that I've really been looking for. Now, I wasn't aware of these guys before hearing this. All this stuff I found out about the band, I found out after the fact. But it's just really killer thrash. And again, highly recommend picking that one up. Next up, another album that I wasn't aware of. This is Thank You and Goodnight Live from Samson. Samson, of course, is the band that brought us Bruce Dickinson. New wave of British heavy metal band. Probably more in the hard rock, the 70s hard rock vein, or the 70s hard rock side of new wave of British heavy metal. But just a really underrated band. I mean, the Samson debut, I think, is one of the top 10 new wave of British heavy metal albums ever released. And I just don't think it gets enough credit. This live album is after Dickinson left the band. I can't remember Nicky Moore took over on vocals. And let's see, this was recorded live in Holland March and April 1984. So this is shortly after Bruce left the band. But the band sounds amazing. The vocals are phenomenal. Definitely a great album to get. The US cover is totally different, which is why I didn't recognize this when I got it. Once I saw what the US cover looked like, it was a cover that was familiar to me. I still hadn't heard the album, though. But I really dig this one. I actually just spun this again last night. And this is on Metronome Records. And this, too, is a German pressing. I picked this one up last time I was in Destin visiting my dad, so that would have been, I don't know, 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. There's a little record store there. I found some pretty good gems there for good prices. I think I paid 10 or 12 bucks for this. So I'm real happy with that find. Next up, the other album that I bought at the same store. All you guys from the 80s, I'm sure you remember this one. This was one of the first big metal supergroups. I don't even know that I'd call it a supergroup. They call it a super session. But you've got members of the Rod. You got Billy Sheehan from Talus, Danny Spitz from Anthrax, Kim Simmons from Savoy Brown. You've got Exciter, Rhett Forrester, TKO, and the list goes on. I mean, there's dozens of people on this album. But this is the Thrasher album. It had the hype sticker, which I have never seen on the hype sticker before on any other copies. So I don't know if they pulled that off the plastic and put it on here or what the deal was. But you've got the inner sleeve here. And let's see if it says what bands everybody's from, because there's more bands than that involved in this. There were close to a dozen bands, members of about a dozen bands involved in this. But it's on the Green Combat label. So there's some really killer songs on here, and there's some songs I could absolutely live without. Definitely worth grabbing. If you're a fan of any of those bands, grab it. There's 3 or 4 songs on here that make this album worth having. You just got to get through the rest of the songs, which are just mediocre, Not a bad album, not a great album, but there are some great songs on there. Next up, this was another album that was super, super influential to me. When this came out, I should say when it came out, because I got it a year or two after it came out. I was actually picking up the cassette for the band's third album. Everybody had told me about that. And this album was on sale, so I grabbed this on cassette as well. And it was this album that absolutely blew me away, especially the first track on here, which I think is the best death metal track of all time. Number one. It's not the best death metal album, but it's the best death metal track of all time. And this would be in my top 10 or 15 best death metal albums of all time. The band's first album is probably in the top 2 death metal bands or albums of all time. And we're talking about Blessed Are the Sick from Morbid Angel. I've been looking for this for a long time. I finally ran across a copy. This is not an original. This was just repressed too, I think this year. But this is the 2011 repress from the UK. And if you haven't heard the song Fall From Grace, go online and check it out. By far, in my opinion, the best death metal song of all time. The drums on here just reinforced what I loved about drums. And I tried so hard to get the drums down for that song. I got pretty close. I never quite got it. But just an amazing album. The third album that I was talking about was, of course, Covenant. Again, and you could argue it's their fourth album. Their actual first album didn't get released until after Covenant, I believe. But Covenant was okay. And I don't really like anything that they ever released after that, personally. But Blessed Are the Sick is an amazing death metal album. And obviously Altars of Madness is just a classic, an all-time metal classic. But phenomenal album. Again, check out Fall From Grace, but this whole album is killer. And then let's see, last but not least, so I went and saw these guys about 2 months ago. Very traditional metal sound, new wave of traditional metal. They have kind of an early 80s new wave of British heavy metal sound mixed with a hardcore punk edge. I wasn't super excited about seeing them, so I saw these guys open for Savage Master. And if you've watched my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of Savage Master. And these guys opened, well, there were 2 bands before them, but you know what I mean. These were the main opening act. And it's funny, I walked up to the merch booth and saw this goofy-ass looking dude with a fucked up haircut and another dude with these dreadlocks. He was selling like leather bracelets. I'm like, who is this loser? You know? And then they announced the band was taking the stage and it was a singer. And I didn't recognize. I checked out some videos. This is an album I knew about. They're on, is it Shadow Kingdom? I'm sorry, Hell's Headbangers Records, which I frequent the site. So I knew that this album was coming out. It's a band I was familiar with. But when I checked them out on YouTube, all that there was available at the time was live clips. And I just wasn't impressed with what I heard. Then they took the stage, and man, they blew me away. Their live show is so intense and so good. They just get into it. And these are all older guys. I would say mid to late 30s into the late 40s. With, I think it's the bassist, looks like he's the oldest. But it's all older guys. And they're just playing killer traditional metal, but it's definitely got that hardcore punk edge to it. And I really love the show. These guys blew out Savage Master, who, again, they're one of my favorite new bands. And Savage Master I was kind of disappointed with. I mean, they went through the stages, hit all the points, but it just wasn't their best performance. It came down to Stacy. I saw her before, and you know, usually she's real good about interacting with the crowd and being nice and talking to everybody, and she was just kind of in a standoffish mood, you know. And when she got on stage and they did their set, you know, she was doing all the theatrical stuff she always does, but you could tell she wasn't completely into it. And then the same thing after, you know, I went and got something signed for Scott, and I mean, she was cool and gracious and signed it, but usually she's talkative, and you know, you end up having a little conversation with her. She didn't talk to anybody. She just signed it. Thank you, goodbye. You know, next. So Nuke killed it that night, though. And this is the album that I am speaking of. I got it signed by the band. I was kind of disappointed, though. They did a little bit of a bait and switch on me. They didn't do it on purpose. They were showing, they did a real limited first run in 2016 on clear with slime splattered vinyl, and that's what they were showing. And then I grabbed it and got it signed, and then got home and noticed that this was the gray vinyl, or the silver vinyl, which isn't that big a deal. I just thought that the green splatter vinyl was a lot cooler. But really good record. I recommend picking it up. It's not expensive. I think you can get it for about $15 from Hell's Headbangers. But yeah, it's a great album. I think it comes with a poster and stuff. So you got Welcome to Delta City. And the names, man. You got Richie Riot, who's the singer. You've got Redbeard on bass, who's the older guy, who just likes like this heavy metal hippie. Tony Chaos, Mike Tuff, and Sweet Pete. You know, killer band though, and really good live set. And it comes with this poster. And the artwork there is really cool and very punk rock. But again, definitely check these guys out. That's it. I'm going to go ahead and end this by, I'm going to put on a couple of clips of Nuke, and I'll follow that with a couple of clips of Savage Master from that night. Other than that, take care, VC, and I'll see you soon.